The sound of hurried footsteps hurried across the room before a girl's voice echoed loudly, asking Seraphina if this was really okay. The lady in question, a refined beauty with long dark hair, merely turned without batting an eyelash, teacup still in hand. Seraphina put her teacup back on its saucer and with all regality told Sandra that her behavior was improper. Of course, Sandra bows an apology for the rash behavior, but she said what she said and apparently there's more. With her whole chest, Sandra reports to the other girl that Eric was seen having tea with the saint candidate again. Upon hearing that, all the ladies in the room started chattering among themselves. How scandalous! They can't believe that a young lady would do such a thing. While others proclaimed how they can attest to what Sandra said because they also saw the saint candidate with Eric too. What's even worse is that other girls said that they also saw the girl with Valerie as well. While everybody else got all excited for the drama, Seraphina remained calm. If anything, she urged Sandra to sit with them for now. The latter is more agitated than Seraphina, and even more so because she can't understand how she could be so calm in light of this. Sandra simply can't stand the way Eric, the crown prince, is getting close to another young lady when he's already betrothed. At that, surprisingly, Seraphina laughs because even she knows that the saint candidate had been hanging out with Sandra's fiancé as well. Well, that gagged Sandra for a bit, and even she had to admit she's a bit flustered with that. Finally, we have the story's cast of characters. The one opening the scene is none other than Sandra Aldini, the viscount's daughter, who is currently in her second year of high division. The boy he mentioned before is Eric Halval, the crown prince of the Halval kingdom, also in his second year of high division. According to Sandra, the other people who were with the saint candidate and Eric were her fiancé, Orva and Sauli. The saint candidate she speaks of is Aini Mikkola, a first year of high division. Meanwhile, Sandra's fiancé, Orva McRynan, is the heir to the viscount family and a third year of high division. There's also Sauli Marquis, the heir to the marquis family, who is also in his first year. Of course, we also have Seraphina Percivalta, the marquis's daughter and the crown prince's fiancée, who is currently in her second year. Sauli's older sister, Bernadetta Marquis, the marquis's daughter, is a long-haired, timid girl who always keeps her head down and is currently in her third year of high division. Speaking of Bernadetta, Sandra turns her attention to her, obviously annoyed at the other's lack. Just what is the meaning of all this? Wasn't the American family supposed to be the patron of the saint candidate? The way Aini is acting now just shows that the American family failed in supervising her as her tutor. Bernadetta didn't even bother explaining and only hung her head lower, apologizing to Sandra. Seraphina comes to her rescue, telling Sandra that she shouldn't put all the blame on her. Bernadetta's doing her best too, you know. But the feisty Sandra wouldn't hear it, citing that effort without results is meaningless. What a line. Even Seraphina had no choice but to agree on that one, while Bernadetta kept her mouth shut, obviously distressed. The three ladies who are seated on a separate table sip their tea in silence. Meanwhile, the rest of the girls start chattering among themselves, seeing how Sandra is so strict, but it's also true. Even they can't help but blame Bernadetta for her shortcomings for this one. You see, for the past few months, these three ladies have been quite unsettled, and the very reason that's causing a stir in the hearts of the students of Halval Royal Academy High Division is Aini Mikkola. This girl is the illegitimate daughter of a rural baron's family, located far from the royal capital. She grew up being treated like a servant, but one day Aini exhibited a rare light magic, thus catapulting her as a saint candidate, which is of equal status to the high nobility. Soon after, she was transferred to the Royal Academy, attended by the children of royalty and nobility. The thing is, there's a certain decorum and etiquette that must be followed, which Aini refuses to do out of lack of knowledge or naivete. This irks Sandra to no end, especially since she has repeatedly called out the saint candidate to not get too close to men who are already engaged, meaning Eric and Orva. But despite being reprimanded with such reasons, Aini would always counter that they're her friends and that status doesn't matter at school. The girl simply refuses to listen. So now Sandra zeroes in on Bernadetta, questioning the latter if they really spent half the year teaching Aina her noble etiquette. Bernadetta can only apologize again. In her defense, she did tell Aini all those things. Sandra snaps her fan shut as she remembers a pretty annoying ordeal just recently. She shared how she tried to warn her fiancé Orva a couple of times now, but the man is just as obstinate as Aini is. If anything, he's obviously blinded by her charms given how he has become so overprotective of her. He even went as far as to say that Aini is pitiful, and that Sandra and the others are bullying her. Seriously, it has given Sandra nothing but a headache. Even the other ladies felt bad for Sandra, because of course Orva would say something like that. That's just how he is. But all in all, Sandra always knew that her fiancé had always been like that. The only thing that occupies his thoughts is swordsmanship. And even though he's not really thoughtful, she's okay with that. She believes that the real problem is Eric. She turns to Seraphina asking if the latter doesn't feel anything about this. As usual, Seraphina sips her tea with finesse as Sandra, Bernadetta, and the other girls anxiously await her answer. Seraphina puts her teacup down and tells everyone that she doesn't feel anything at all. With that, she stands and takes her leave, while the other girls quietly watch her walk away. Seraphina walks through the academy's corridors, all eyes trailing on her until she stops. Right in front of her is the very topic of their conversation just now, the saint candidate Aini, who happily greets her. With her are Eric, Orva, and Sali. Seraphina returns the greeting while everyone else holds their breath with this sudden interaction. Because Aini is close to His Majesty, some are saying that she would make a better crown princess. And right now, the academy is split between the Seraphina faction and the royal faction, backing Aini and the church. Seraphina notes that Eric seems to be in a bad mood, which made Aini assume that Seraphina wanted to have tea with Eric as well. With a beaming smile, she apologizes to the older girl, saying she'll invite her next time. She what? Everybody is stunned. The daughter of a country baron actually said aloud that she'll invite a marquis's daughter? The chatter starts getting louder, with many of them offended on Seraphina's behalf. Then there's the idiot Orva, who obviously has sided with Aini, saying how she's so kind to extend such an invitation to Seraphina. While everybody else is so caught up in the drama, Seraphina is thinking that if the saint candidate became queen and treated everyone regardless of their birthright, even she would have to admit that it's ideal. Just now, she realized that more people are fond of Aini than she initially thought. So this is the drama that's unfolding in the Royal Academy. The Crown Prince's fiancée, Seraphina, who was raised from childhood in a marquis house, versus the saint candidate, who stands equal to high nobility and position. Furthermore, the latter is cheerful, optimistic, and hardworking. To the students of the Academy, this setup overlaps with the villainess and heroine of the popular romance stories in society, which gives quality entertainment. But back to Seraphina. She assures Aini that she's fine. After all, she has her own engagements, and she also has an obligation to have tea with Eric, His Highness, at the royal castle. With that said, she simply tells Aini that there's no need for the betrothed to face each other at school. At the mention of obligation, Aini starts to make a face as if she's tearing up. If you love someone, wouldn't you want to be with them all the time? But Seraphina merely smiled. Seraphina simply smiled, thinking that it would be troublesome for her if Eric and Aini made demands of her. As for the saint candidate's remark about love, Seraphina dismissed it and told Aini that's her own way of thinking. Everyone didn't expect to hear such a dismissive answer, but Eric merely stared at her. With that, Seraphina did a curtsy and had to leave since she still had afternoon classes to attend. She passed by them, and as soon as she was out of earshot, Orva couldn't help but comment on how cold her comment was. 2 days later, Sandra is once again the first to bring up the hot tea. She heard that Eric went out into town with the saint candidate. To this, Seraphina points out that the two weren't alone. They were accompanied by Orva too. Well, that is true. Going out of school grounds is one thing, but they've gone outside now? With that, Seraphina stops drinking her tea. As always, with her calm demeanor, she tells Sandra that she has nothing to say to His Highness. After all, Eric has been attending their tea parties every other day. Upon hearing that, one of the other ladies sitting at the other table raised her hand in question. Does this mean that Lady Seraphina doesn't mind what His Highness does as long as he fulfills his duties? Seraphina fetches her fan, as she stands by what she said about Eric. He has not neglected his duties as a fiancé. Furthermore, he's also earnestly studying to become a proper king, so what more could she ask for? The girl who asked the question had a follow-up, and it's something no one even dared to say out loud, but she did so anyway. If His Majesty would take a concubine, would Seraphina allow it? Both Sandra and Bernadetta turned to the girl. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. Meanwhile, Seraphina maintains her smile. That sounds like the kind of question people obsessed with love stories would ask. Still, Seraphina answers it with dignity, saying it will depend on the time and situation. Scandalous question aside, she diverted it and countered with a better question. Wouldn't it be wise to study the matter of the king taking concubines more? Of course, the girl who asked the question has no answer to that. The more affection a concubine receives, the more power is given to her family and faction. If she bears a child, it could even lead to succession disputes. This talk about concubines carries much more weight than some noble keeping a mistress. She tells everyone that her engagement to Eric was arranged by the king, and as far as she's concerned, Seraphina has done her best as a noble to fulfill her duties accordingly. In line with that, she calls out everyone in the room. Since all of them present are upperclassmen, they should reawaken their duties as nobles and act accordingly. Sandra can only mutter the last words to herself, while Seraphina hopes adding those specific words would make her message clear. The next day, this time, it's Aini who came bursting through their door, claiming what Seraphina just said was cruel. The marquis's daughter merely looked at her, while Bernadetta quickly got up from her seat, reprimanding the saint candidate for such scandalous and rude behavior. Even Sandra's taken aback at Bernadetta's reaction. But instead of backing down, Aini even questioned her tutor. How could she call her rude? The saint candidate almost throws a fit, reiterating that status doesn't matter within the academy. Isn't that what they said? Aini even crossed her arms and pouted in defiance, while Bernadetta couldn't believe the gall of this girl. She's acting childish again. Seraphina used this chance to insert herself, asking Aini what she was referring to when she called the former cruel. Aini had no problem launching her grievance at how Seraphina said that her engagement with Eric was done merely out of duty. What's more, Aini says it's terrible. It's a loveless marriage for which she pities Eric. What is this? And right when Seraphina just told the ladies yesterday that they should carry out their duties and act accordingly. It looks like someone's already spreading such things the very next day, huh? Just then, more people entered the tea hall. It's Eric, Orva, and Sauli. Now that everybody is here, Seraphina suggests they should have a little talk, which the others quickly oblige. Once everyone is seated, Seraphina addresses the most pressing matter, at least to Aini. The saint candidate had something to say to her, right? Aini affirms and reiterates her earlier question. Was it true that Seraphina really said that her engagement to Eric is a duty? Seraphina easily confirms that it is, resulting in gasps and murmurs among everybody else. Like before, Aini tells her that it's horrible and pities poor Lord Eric. Seraphina turns to her fiancé, asking if he really thinks he's pitiful. Eric answers that he doesn't really think so when suddenly Aini grabs his hand in hers. Bernadetta and Sandra frown on such a bold act, with Aini almost begging Eric not to strain himself. She tells him that even if he's the prince, a marriage out of duty alone must be painful. The saint candidate is well aware that it's all politics and that nobles have to accept arranged marriages, but she's against it because Seraphina is far too cold. The latter only narrowed her eyes at the two and kept quiet. Once again, it's Sandra who is the first to call Aini out on her antics. Just whose hand does she think she's holding? To that, the saint candidate rebuts that even though Eric's hand is held right in front of Seraphina, the latter remains cold and doesn't even flinch. Doesn't that make her the real problem here? But to Aini's surprise, Seraphina is laughing. Aini starts to get angry. Why does Seraphina act like this doesn't concern her? She should be a little jealous. Finally, Seraphina closes her fan. In her mind, everybody must be thinking about the same thing right now. But she knows Aini and the others are completely mistaken. Finally, she speaks and asks Aini why she should feel jealous over some oddly charming little puppy that His Highness mildly took interest in. All this time, Seraphina never thought that she and Aini were on the same level. The ladies at the academy can't help but humor themselves, especially with the new saint in training who just transferred to the academy. From what they heard, this saint candidate's circumstances are just like in the Little Princess story, no? The Little Princess story is about a bright and diligent girl working as a maid in a noble household. Later on, it was revealed that she's actually the daughter of a high-ranking official, thus boosting her rank through society. At the same time, she starts to receive attention from all sorts of men, including a prince. All in all, it's a love story that's currently popular in the kingdom of Halval. The Little Princess story has similarities with the current happenings involving the saint candidate. After all, the saint candidate was taken in by a high-ranking noble house, the Americans, and that very house also has a talented heir who is of the same age as the saint candidate. It's just like in the story. Plus, there's even a real prince at the academy. It got the ladies thinking that maybe, you know. Before she could say it out loud, the other girl shushed her, saying it's disrespectful. After all, His Highness Prince Eric already has Seraphina, right? The girl cautions the other that if Sandra heard this, it would be serious. If it were Bernadetta, maybe it would be okay. With that said, she hopes the other girl keeps this a secret. In the Little Princess story, the girl who was engaged to the prince bullies the heroine. In the end, she gets dumped by the prince. The prince's ex-fiancé in the story had a pretty sharp personality like Sandra's. Seraphina, on the other hand, is nothing like that. She has no weaknesses and totally carries herself with the aura of the queen of the academy. She looks calm on the surface, but everyone knows she sees herself on a completely different level from the rest of the students. But then again, there are high-ranking nobles who easily get nervous, like Bernadetta. Which is pretty strange because according to Bernadetta often mocks her studies at home. This prompted them to think that maybe Bernadetta's attitude changes and she bullies people depending on who they are, no? But wait a minute, now that the girl realized it, these three ladies from the school look a lot like the villainesses from the Little Princess's story, no? There's Seraphina, who flaunts her status. Bernadetta, who acts timidly in front of everyone but is actually bullying the heroine behind the scenes. And Sandra, the hot-tempered one. Those three are perfect together. They're the perfect trio of villainesses. Now back to the current situation. Everyone holds their breath waiting for what the saint candidate will say about what Seraphina just said about her. A puppy? Finally, Aini raises her voice as usual, complaining again about how the other girl referred to her as a dog this time. Seraphina asks if it made things better if she used the term puppy, which she just did, right? She beams because that's exactly how she sees Aini, a cute little puppy, and even asks Eric about his thoughts on it. The saint candidate looks over to Eric with pleading eyes, and after a moment of thought he pulls his hand away and speaks his truth. In his eyes, he always thought Aini looked more like a river weasel. Aini was not expecting that answer at all. What is he saying? Seraphina does the honors and tells Aini as it is. Eric has only ever thought of Aini as something unusual and nothing more. So again, Seraphina asks Aini why she should be jealous of that. For the first time, Solly speaks up and tells Seraphina that she has gone too far. But at the mention of that, isn't Solly the one being far more disrespectful here with the way he's treating Aini as if she's Seraphina's equal? Solly realizes his mistake and hangs his head. Even his older sister can't save him from that. But Aini circles the topic back to her and uses the same line she always says to everybody. Status doesn't matter in this academy, right? At least that's what she heard. This time, Seraphina asks just where she got that information. The Saint candidate draws a blank. She answers that she heard it right before she got transferred at the Mikkola estate, and it was also written in the Academy's handbooks. Seraphina sighs in relief. Finally, it looks like the American family won't have to be punished for Aini's lack of education then. Bernadetta bows her head to Seraphina, apologizing for failing to correct the Saint candidate. Aini gets confused. Why is Bernadetta apologizing? This time it's Sandra who explains everything to the Saint candidate. That thing Aini keeps quoting about how status doesn't matter inside the Academy only applies up through elementary classes before one's debut. This means that once they enter society, there's just no way one can ignore social status, especially in the upper division. In a little while, all of them will be graduating and entering high society with much gusto. This is why learning social etiquette during the brief leniency afforded to the students is one of the purposes of academy life. Royal and high-ranking noble students are often treated specially even within the academy grounds for safety reasons. Didn't Aini notice it before? The salon in the cafeteria is a restricted area. Only certain people can use it. Bernadetta chimes in saying that while Aini claims that status doesn't matter, she herself has been benefiting from those special treatments. Aini rebuts this, saying that as a Saint candidate, she'll be treated equally with high-ranking nobles. Seraphina echoes the last words she said, equal to high-ranking nobles, right? Seraphina explicitly tells her that His Highness Eric is royalty. Aini follows this logic. With Seraphina as his fiancée, then the latter will become royalty as well. They're not just high-ranking nobles. Besides that, Sandra points out that Aini's conduct is a far cry from that of a high-ranking noble. If the Saint candidate claims to be on the same level as them, then shouldn't she at least learn basic manners first? Orva slams his fist on the table. That's enough! He defends the Saint candidate, saying Aini hasn't even been learning etiquette for a full year yet. Too bad for him, his fiancée counters him. Sandra asks Bernadetta what kind of teaching Aini received. If she can't even learn the basics in nearly a year, then that has to be something. Bernadetta explains that Aini seemed to have the basic knowledge of etiquette, so they assumed that teaching her for half a year would be sufficient. But what they didn't expect is for Aini to skip her lessons often. Solly is up against his own sister, telling Bernadetta that she shouldn't blame the Saint candidate for her own shortcomings. Seraphina holds up her hand and tells them to stop. They should put that matter aside for now, but for Aini's education, Seraphina suggests the American family should discuss it again. Now then, Seraphina turns her attention back to Aini. Without missing a beat, she tells the Saint candidate that the latter still has many qualities to improve before she can become a saint. While she's at it, Seraphina also tells her frankly that she has no right to comment on the former's engagement with Eric. The whole table falls silent while Aini can only grit her teeth. Aini is frustrated, shouting for everyone to hear that Eric and Seraphina aren't really in love with each other. Bernadetta and Sandra both turn, one in panic and the other in anger, yet Seraphina remains unfazed. She simply tells Aini that it was a decision made by the king. It's an engagement between the future king and queen. By now, Aini is shaking as she finally bursts into tears. How can that be when Eric told the Saint candidate that she was cute? There was a chorus of murmurs. Others weren't too surprised by this revelation, while Eric pondered for a moment. Could Aini be referring to the time when she asked him if her new ribbon was cute, and Eric agreed? To say the candidate was taken aback is an understatement. She froze on the spot, then started to tremble. Sandra lets out an exasperated sigh. So all this time the ribbon was the cute one and not Aini? Still, the Saint candidate refuses to back down, so why did Eric go shopping with her back then? She vividly remembers how His Highness told her then that he wanted to hear more of what Aini had to say. Seraphina watches Aini crash out in real time, crying, but no one at the table dares to comfort her. If anything, Eric answers her truthfully that he was simply fascinated with Aini's stories. Eric doesn't get the chance to hear about the countryside or learn about the lives of servants, which is why listening to Aini proved to be educational to him. For that, he thanks her. Now that he's at it, he also explains that the reason why he asked Aini to come along with him in town is that she seemed familiar with the place. For His Highness, it was a rare and valuable experience to observe the lower districts. Sauli can't believe what he's hearing. So all this time, the prince did all of that just to broaden his perspective and further his studies? Aini claps back. If he wanted to see the town, then he should have just gone with Seraphina then. Her retort is useless since Eric says that if he and Seraphina went together, then it would have become an official inspection. Still, Aini says they could go wearing disguises then. Eric says he can't do something so reckless. With Seraphina as the next queen, she also has a duty. Plus, if anything happened, it would be too late and he couldn't cause trouble for his guards either. Seraphina listens intently, thinking about how a handsome prince is bound to attract admiration. If she's being honest, Seraphina also knew that from Aini's perspective, Eric's actions must have given her hope of getting closer to him. But the prince never even thought that he could be misunderstood like that, since he's already the crown prince and he already has a fiancée. It just never occurred to him that someone would harbor feelings for him, knowing those facts. Seraphina puts her teacup down, saying there seems to be a misunderstanding about many things. But now that the facts are laid out straight, she asks the saint candidate if she finally understands everything now. Romantic tales and reality are not the same. But oh dear, Seraphina can't believe that the rumors about Eric and the saint candidate being together have spread so far. His Highness verifies if this is true, asking if it's really a thing, even if he already has Seraphina as his fiancée. The latter says, unfortunately, it's true. Seraphina pours herself another cup of tea, thinking that the idea of pairing a different woman with the crown prince, who already has an official fiancé, is close to treason. Those who spread such gossip about royalty and jest are bound to get what's coming to them. Seraphina says that they'll have to reconsider how they associate with those who spread rumors out of curiosity. On the bright side, she tells Eric that they have already identified the households from the pro-church faction, who deliberately spread the rumors and suggests they should discuss it during their next tea party. Eric is impressed as always because Seraphina sure does work fast. Unknown to them, the rest of the students listening to their conversation can't believe that these are the kinds of topics their future king and queen are talking about during their time tea parties. For the nth time, Aini comments on Eric and Seraphina's relationship again, obviously favoring the prince. The two are always working since they will be stuck in a loveless marriage. Poor Eric. On top of the immense pressure to become the king, he also has no peace. Obviously, only Sally and Orva fall for her act, while Seraphina laughs at the saint candidate again. Suddenly, she turned serious and said that she and Eric are united by a firm bond. They're under a mission and duty to support, protect, and elevate this country. Seraphina finds it insulting to compare their bond to such a shallow emotion as love. Ever since their engagement was decided 7 years ago, both Seraphina and Eric have received education to shoulder the weight of the nation. Their relationship, which is built on that trust, cannot be inferior to a romantic feeling. But if they want to talk about love, then Seraphina would oblige them. The only thing she will say is this: she loves this country. A queen is the mother of the nation. What more could be needed than that? Eric shows his support to her and cements their relationship even further by saying they should love and raise the country together. Bernadetta and Sandra both look at Seraphina in awe. The queen of the academy is never shaken. Sandra glances at her fiancé, Orva, who looks distraught. Inside her pocket, Sandra clutches the accessory and makes a mental note that she also needs to reflect on this. So up next, we have the case of Viscountess Sandra Aldini. Let's wind it back to 5 days before the commotion caused by the saint candidate. Sandra sits in front of the vanity mirror with her personal maid dressing her hair. Speaking of dress, the maid tells her mistress that the dress for the garden party hosted by Countess Tilgull will be arriving that evening. Sandra is pleased that the dress will make it in time, most especially since she's been looking forward to how it turned out. While her maid finishes dressing her hair, Sandra makes a mental note to give Orva a heads up about the event, and before long, her hair is done. At the academy, one of the students called out to her. They can't help but notice the ribbon in her hair. Of course they will. She explains that it's made from the fabric woven in the Taltini region. This particular hair accessory is made of fine quality. Just look at the embroidery thread and how it shines beautifully with that luster. When they heard where it was from, the two ladies became even more enamored with the accessory. Based on what they heard, it's made of very fine quality indeed and is quite hard to obtain right now. Sandra tells them that her father's trading company is currently arranging distribution channels, so she believes everyone will be able to get this accessory soon. The girls are happy to hear that and look forward to that. One of the other girls brings up another subject Sandra talked about the other day, and while doing so raised her hand to flick her hair. But as soon as she did, the girl's hand accidentally slapped another's hand. The girl turns to apologize to the other person, and that's when they see that it's actually the saint candidate. Aini holds her hand in pain, which isn't really supposed to be a big deal. But of course, Orva quickly checks on her, worry etched on his face. Even though Aini says she's okay, it's pretty obvious that she's in pain, with Orva putting his hand over her shoulder to comfort her. He even had the gall to say that Aini should go to the infirmary just in case. And for what? For a mild slap on the hand. The two girls can't help but comment on how improper Orva and Aini were acting. And besides, is the pain really that bad that they have to go to the infirmary for it? Meanwhile, Sandra watches, obviously annoyed at how her fiancé is acting. She sighs, and after a beat, she tells Aini that if she's fine, then she should stop leaning her head over Orva's shoulder and move away from him. Orva, the absolute fool that he is, dares to raise his voice and even says that they're the ones who hurt Aini, yet that's all they have to say to her? Sandra answers matter-of-factly about how he's exaggerating with the use of the word hurt in this situation. Besides, they merely brushed hands for Pete's sake. But Orva refuses to tone it down, asking if this is how a perpetrator should say it. Wow, perpetrator, big word for a mere act of brushing hands, no? What's more, he claims that they didn't even apologize. Did they do that on purpose? Sandra maintains a level head, but her fiancé is really out here acting like they're the ones at fault. She could only sigh and tell him that he's being too loud, then turn to the other girl, confirming if she apologized, which the latter affirms by nodding. Orva is still not pleased, yet he starts to turn away, his hand still on Aini's shoulder. He detests how these girls cover each other's backs and even insults them for always talking about accessories. If that's the only thing they will talk about, then why bother attending the academy in the first place? Okay, that's it. He wants to go low? Sandra can go lower, so she finally fights back. As her fiancé and the saint candidate turn their backs, she calls out Orva for talking big like that when their servants have been lamenting. From what she heard, they've been worrying like crazy seeing how the heir to the family is graduating this year, but all he does is swing his sword from morning until night. With that said, they can't help but wonder if he can really manage the territory. Sandra has every right to talk this way, because her family, the Aldinis, are widely successful in business, sharp in profits, and have a pretty strong presence in the social scene. That obviously hit a nerve because Orva whipped his head back so fast, anger evident on his face. It's true, the McRynan family is an elite knight lineage, but they're pretty weak when it comes to subtle political maneuvering. And Sandra is still not done. She also calls him out for for being so shameless at putting his hands on another woman's shoulders right in front of his own fiancé. Sandra wonders what Orva's poor mother would say if she found out about this. She'd be absolutely shocked, and ever since the incident, she's been intolerant of unfaithful men. At the mention of that, Orva backed down a little. Finally, Sandra turns to the saint candidate. How many times does she have to tell Aini? A proper lady of age should not let men touch her freely. It's improper. Of course, Aini is quick to summon tears in her eyes, saying that Orva was only worried about her. Sandra is close to fuming. The nerve of this girl. She remains rude, vulgar, and unrefined. Such a boorish, ill-mannered child Aini is. Sandra finds the latter's behavior so unbearable that even though she points it out every time, Aini never changes. On top of that, for some reason, Aini also always clings to high-ranking nobles' sons who already have their own fiancés. This girl is really acting like the main character, and no words are enough to say how much Sandra hates the saint candidate. She's such a joke. Sandra firmly stands on the belief that the true queen of the academy is Seraphina and no one else. And yet, this uncouth saint candidate even goes as far as interacting with Seraphina's fiancé, the crown prince. Sandra could think of a million more words on how she finds Aini disgraceful, outrageous, and disgusting. What she's doing is unthinkable. But that's beside the point because right now, she needs to deal with these two headaches in front of her. In the end, Orva couldn't rebut any of that, and the only thing he could say is that Aini's innocence is pure and refreshing, and that they both have done nothing to feel guilty about. For the first time, Orva's face softens as he looks at Aini, saying that this is why he hates noble society. It's so full of suspicion and cynicism, while Aini stares back in equal softness. Sandra can only smirk. Boy, her fiancé is really out here acting like this. Isn't this reason enough for her to get irritated at him? But whatever, she tells Orva that he can do whatever he wants, as long as he doesn't forget his duty as a fiancé. She informs him that this weekend is Countess Tilgal's garden party. She's the leader in jewelry and design and the idol of all aspiring noblewomen. Sandra tells Orva that he needs to make himself known at least a little in the social scene, but the latter and Aini are already walking away. Meanwhile, the two girls from before can only look on with jealousy. It's the Countess Tilgal Sandra was talking about after all. Aini and Orva are already a few feet away from them before Sandra can hear her fiancé say he understands. As soon as the two are out of earshot, one of the ladies apologizes to Sandra for the way her hand slipped earlier, but Sandra says she shouldn't worry about it. What she does find strange is how the saint candidate is making a fuss over a minor bump. Even the ladies agree with her on that. Since they already brought it up, the girl also had to admit that Orva's behavior was simply unacceptable. Despite butting heads with him earlier, surprisingly, Sandra covers for her fiancé, saying Orva is a man of strong chivalric ideas. She thinks he's just probably overexcited about meeting a saint for the first time in years, fully believing that he'll calm down soon enough. The lady's admiration for her grew even more with what she's doing, showering her with praise. Sandra knows how to deal with a musclehead like Orva, but her real problem is this. She can't believe Seraphina is turning a blind eye to that ill-mannered saint candidate. One of the girls tells her that she's bordering on disrespect with what she said, but Sandra won't take it back. Seraphina should assert her presence more firmly. In her eyes, there's no one else who could be the next queen but Seraphina, because no other lady is as perfect as her. Not only does she bear the name of a prestigious marquis house, but Seraphina also has a duty to reprimand both the saint candidate and the other overly enthusiastic pro-church types who claim that the saint candidate and Eric should be engaged. But when Sandra brought this up to Seraphina during their tea party, 3 days before the saint candidate's incident, Seraphina simply told the former that she had no complaints whatsoever about all this. As soon as they exited the tea hall, all Sandra could think about was why they were allowing the rude little runt to run wild like that. Just then she hears someone call to her from behind. Sandra turns and sees Bernadetta, who immediately bows her hand in apology. Sandra looks at her for a moment before saying the latter doesn't need to apologize to her. But Bernadetta insists, saying this is all because of her failure in educating the saint candidate. She was about to say more about Sandra's fiancé when Sandra finally snapped, "She just told Bernadetta she doesn't want to hear about it, didn't she? It's already irritating enough for her that the saint candidate is stealing her fiancé. So if Bernadetta goes as far as apologizing to her right now, it will make Sandra the pitiful one." Rather than Bernadetta's apology, what Sandra wants is for the former to promise her that she'll re-educate the saint candidate. Sandra thinks offering only empty words of apology without the will to make any effort toward improvement is pretty shameless. Bernadetta lowers her head and doesn't even reply to the former's claim. You see, Sandra doesn't like people who won't fulfill their duties, and Bernadetta is one of them. She's the daughter of the prestigious Marquis Maricont family, yet she has no faction of her own. Bernadetta simply attends Seraphina's tea parties. On the other hand, the Maricont family is acting as the guardian of the saint candidate, and their eldest son, Sali, has become one of the entourage that frequently hangs around Aini. Yet here is Bernadetta, who remains undecided and vague. In Sandra's mind, she has no problem if ever Bernadetta comes out and supports Seraphina as the next queen. That's her right. But from the looks of it, it looks like the only reason why Bernadetta keeps hanging around Seraphina is because she keeps getting invited to the latter's tea parties. Be that as it may, Sandra also finds it frustrating how Bernadetta has so much wasted potential. The latter is already beautiful as she is, yet she keeps hunched over. And when Bernadetta speaks, she looks down the whole time. Now then, Sandra says, if Bernadetta has nothing else to say, she'll be taking her leave since she's quite busy. After all, tomorrow is the garden party, which she looks forward to the most. Sandra still has a pile of things to complete. First, he'll have Orva memorize all he needs to know about the McRhinen territory in the carriage ride on the way to the party. Then she'll introduce him during the greeting to the Countess. She makes a mental note to do a final check on the outfit and accessories too. Speaking of accessories, Sandra's only regret is that she couldn't get her hands on an early piece from the Countess's brand. She had hoped to just get one for the sake of a conversation piece. The next day, Sandra is all dolled up waiting for her fiancé. Orva seems to be running late, huh? Just then, the main door opens, so Sandra makes her way to the receiving area. A boy bows before her, saying it has been a while since he has seen her, and thanks Sandra for taking care of his brother Orva. Huh? Sandra is surprised to see Lord Gerald, a younger man with a kind face, smiling sweetly at her. Why is Gerald here? Sandra sure didn't expect the younger man to appear as her escort. This young man is the Viscount's second son, Gerald McRhinen, who is a second-year middle school student. But wait, does this mean Orva stood her up again? Sandra makes her way down and approaches Gerald, with the latter beaming as he explains that he was asked to come and escort Sandra in place of his older brother, who had something urgent to do. Sandra takes Gerald's extended hand and smiles meekly, but in her mind, she's fuming. How could Orva forget? Even after she reminded him so many times, too. At the carriage ride, Sandra has a smile plastered on her face, but she's way inside her head thinking about how Orva ditched her again. He keeps acting like this even if it's been decided that he'll join the Knight Order after graduation. As the one who will inherit the McRhinen family, that's not the only thing he should think about. Does he have no thoughts about appearances in society? How many times does he have to bail on his promises before he's satisfied? She remembers how the latter was too busy back then, either with sword training or participating in night drills. She can't believe the likes of him, and he's supposed to be the future aide to the king too. Gerald calls her name, pulling Sandra out of her thoughts as he presents a brooch to her. He wants her to have it. Sandra can't believe it. This is an early piece from the Countess Tilgil's brand. He smiles triumphantly because Sandra knows her stuff. He thought it would be a nice touch, which was why he got it prepared in advance. Sandra is still reeling from shock. She touches the bracelet she's wearing, saying how she could only barely get her hands on the current pieces. So how did Gerald get his hands on this one? Simple. Gerald used his mother's connections. Well, that makes sense. Sandra knows full well that the McRynan family has a long history of strong connections among the nobility after all. She smiles and thanks Gerald for the accessory, saying that if he insists, then she'll just borrow it. But the latter says Sandra can keep it, leaving her shocked for the second time in the same hour, which is quickly followed by her third shock a moment later. Gerald holds the same accessory, saying he has another one like it. Sandra keeps quiet and asks him if they will be wearing matching accessories. Gerald says yes, asking if she's okay with her wearing it with him. Sandra ponders for a moment because it's a little off to match accessories with a man who is not her fiancé, but at the same time wearing something this exquisite would be a waste. In the end, her latter choice prevailed as she took the brooch from Gerald. Matching with her partner for the party doesn't seem too bad. She pins it on the fabric, positioning it near her left collarbone. She asks Gerald if it suits her, and if it's not obvious enough, the boy is smitten. Thankfully, he managed to recover in time, beaming as he said that the brooch matches Sandra's eyes perfectly. She thanks him for the compliment, but in her mind she's thinking that if Gerald managed to prepare such a perfect piece of jewelry for her, then it only means that he already knew in advance that his older brother wouldn't make it to today's event. Sandra feels anger starting to boil inside her as the picture of Aini and Orva sitting together flashes in her mind. If Orva can have time for tea parties with the saint candidate, then he should be sending a personal apology to her. But back to Gerald. She remembers the younger man said he had a brooch prepared. But if Orva's sudden commitment is really urgent, one of them is clearly lying. There's no way Orva could have prepared and arranged all this. He doesn't even understand the values of accessories normally. On the other hand, Gerald here does. Sandra strikes up a conversation commending Gerald for being so well versed in ornaments. He answers that even though their family is a knightly family, their domain has a mine. And as a member of the family, it's important as a topic of conversation in society. Hearing him speak like this, Sandra can't help but compare the brothers. Where Orva excels in swordsmanship and has little regard for education, here's Gerald, who is thoughtful and considerate. The striking difference. Looking at the younger man, Sandra notes how healthy he is, considering how she heard that he was a weak child back then. Compared to the musclehead Orva, who was born with a strong frame and started wielding the sword before he could think, Gerald's skills with the sword are far less, and he's much more delicate. Furthermore, Gerald is also gentle and kind to women, which explains why he's pretty popular in society. Sandra sighs and says aloud that if only Orva would take just a sliver of Gerald's example, but the latter dismissed that thought. He feels a little unsettled because, unlike his strong brother, Gerald claims he is a weakling. Sandra tells him right then and there that it's fine if he chooses a different path besides the sword. She continues, saying that everyone has different strengths, so he should use what he has to its fullest, just make up for what he lacks elsewhere. He can constantly reflect on his talents and continue to work hard. After all, everyone has their own path set, so he only needs to dedicate himself to fulfilling his responsibilities. For a second there, Gerald saw an image of the young Sandra flash before him. He flushes and thanks Sandra. Then he turns serious, asking her if he can have a bit of her time after the party. Well, of course. Sandra tells him that she doesn't mind at all, which immediately lifts Gerald's spirit. Seeing Gerald smile with his kind features, Sandra can't help but note how strikingly different the two brothers are from each other. And now let's talk about the day before the Saint Candidate incident. Sandra stands primly in front of the academy entrance. In her mind, she'll have Orva apologize for yesterday's matter, and then she'll press him about what he sees for the future. The other students pass by Sandra and greet her, when suddenly she pulls a face upon hearing a familiar but unwelcome voice. The Saint Candidate has arrived along with Eric, Orva, and Solly surrounding her. Aini's voice rings loud, saying how much fun she had yesterday and asking if they want to go out again sometime. Orva is quick to confirm, while Eric merely said it was intriguing. Did Sandra hear that right? Aini said, yesterday, right? Sandra moves away from her spot and approaches their group, with Aini and Eric the first to notice her. Sandra curtsies to the prince, to which Eric greets her with a good morning. She maintains grace and apologizes for interfering with them in the middle of their conversation, but she couldn't help doing so given how she heard that person, aka Aini, shouting in the street. Sandra smiles, but there is fury behind that facade as she asks the Saint Candidate if they went out somewhere yesterday. Aini happily confirms that it's just as Sandra heard. The Saint Candidate starts rambling about how Eric said he wanted someone to show him around town, so naturally Aini and Orva went with him. Orva has his eyes averted from Sandra. Meanwhile, the rest of the students who were coming in for today's classes stopped in their tracks as they listened in on this shocking revelation. Did they hear that right? His Highness actually went with the Saint Candidate, even if there were guards available? Aini, who's oblivious that they're creating a spectacle, even dared to ask Orva how fun it was. Sandra only looks at him with a blank expression, but Orva still can't even look at his fiancé while answering Aini that he had fun. Oh wait, Aini remembers something. She points to her new hair accessory, saying Orva bought it for her yesterday. Sandra can't believe her ears. Meanwhile, Orva's panic is becoming more evident by the second, still refusing to look at Sandra as all this happened. But there goes Aini, saying Sandra has such a kind fiancé. Aini reaches out and tugs Eric's blazer, saying they should go again, which Eric says yes to. With that, their group passed by Sandra and she remained standing there, not exchanging a single word with her fiancé. Later that day, Sandra finally confronts Orva. What was he thinking? Orva has his arms crossed, defensively using the excuse that he was acting as a guard. They couldn't let Eric go out alone with the saint candidate after all. Sandra points out that if it's about guarding his highness, then there are professionals for that. But judging from the situation, it looks like Orva already knew in advance that he would be going into town. He knows that, right? If that was so, then why didn't he even explain or apologize to Sandra? Orva didn't say a word, and when he did, he said that it was because if he told her, then she would have definitely objected. Of course she would be against it. Sandra is mad because supposedly this time it was Eric who invited the saint candidate, but Aini always behaves without restraint. She stresses that it's Orva's responsibility as a prospective royal aide to advise his highness not to accompany such an indecent person. After she finished speaking, Orva only sighed. This time he stares daggers at his fiancé, saying he's amazed at how Sandra comes up with so many insults, one after another. She's taken aback but quickly recovers, saying those aren't insults, they're facts. If Aini were here right now, she would still say the same things directly to the saint candidate. Orva raises his voice at how ridiculous his fiancé sounded. He tells Sandra that there's no way he'd let Aini hear his fiancé's filthy verbal abuse. Again, Sandra points out that it's not abuse. She's merely pointing out the facts and giving advice, but Orva is not hearing her. He tells her that Aini is a pure-hearted girl who is happy with a hair ornament from a downtown street stall, blushing a little as he remembers it. Then, just as suddenly, he glares at Sandra, telling her straight up that she shouldn't lump Aini with herself, who only decorates herself in expensive items that don't look all that different. That was not only a huge blow to Sandra, it's a low blow as well. With that, Orva walks away and leaves her standing by herself. Her family, the Aldinis, deals heavily in fashion and accessories. Sandra herself is an important representative of their family's brand. Orva may say all she talks about is ornaments, but she always works to stay informed. More importantly, she genuinely loves to dress up. She has real confidence in the things that she wears. But now, even those are being belittled by none other than her very fiancé?